We are Roots Revival, and we are excited to be able to be here with all of you and to be able to have a service and speak about something that is really significant and poignant to all of us, especially at this moment. So I am Reverend Danny Johnson. I'm a numerologist with the Ivy League Psychic Academy. We have Reverend Christina Del Rey, an amazing astrologer with the Ivy League Psychic Academy as well. And of course, our dear Paul, who makes the world go round. And so as we have shared in our past services, Roots Revival is an opportunity for us to talk about the ways that Spirit shows up for us and the ways that with regard to numerology and astrology and tarot and psychic mediumship, how all of these aspects of connecting with Spirit relate to all of us as humans having a very spiritual beings having a really in-depth human experience. So today's conversation, we're actually going to have we're going to have this conversation in several parts. And today we're actually going to have a conversation about ego and what it is. So today we're going to have the opportunity to talk about what ego is, and next week we'll have the chance to get into and have the chance to explore how we have the opportunity to engage with and heal with our ego. But today we're going to talk about what it is. What is it and how it affects us? So Reverend Ivy Rivera, Pastor Ivy Rivera, who leads our Roots Revival services. She is not with us tonight, but she was very intentional about sharing some of her thoughts on ego. And we want to start off our service by discussing some of the ways that she really thinks about and has had the chance to engage with and understand what ego is. And we want to make sure to share this. So Ivy really has shared that the ego is the driving force of self-reflection. And for anyone who has had the chance to listen to or have or be a part of any of Ivy's service, whether it be services or classes here at the Ivy League Psychic Academy, we know that self-reflection and self-accountability are really kind of some of the core tenets of what spiritual growth and development is. So the ego gives us the opportunity to understand how we are able to think about and see who we are and the ways that we can best improve upon our human experience, us as spiritual beings with this human experience. And Ivy shares that even though the ego is labeled as a bad thing and something that we need to eliminate, that actually the ego is actually an essential part of the spiritual experience. And unfortunately, the ego has received a bad rap. And it's been kind of like shared and told that, and it's been kind of like widely touted, especially most recently, that a part of the spiritual experience and spiritual awakening is to like eliminate the ego and to like kill the ego and basically make the ego non-existent. And that unfortunately, that's just unrealistic. And to try to kill the ego is really setting ourselves up for failure. Because if we think that we can kill the ego and then we try to, and then we realize that we cannot, that actually could set us back in just making sure that we do not regress in our spiritual growth. So to try to do that is unfortunate, and so we want to make sure to stay away from and stray away from thinking. Number one, thinking that we can kill the ego, and two, feeling as though killing the ego will somehow enhance our spiritual experience. And the thing is, the ego is there with purpose. Ivy shares that the ego is absolutely there with purpose. And instead of demonizing and glorifying getting rid of the ego, again, we have to remember that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And the thing is, so Ivy often speaks about level jumping and the importance of not attempting to skip the levels of what it means to heal and what it means to engage in our spiritual growth. And the thing is, by trying to eliminate the ego, what that does is it prevents us from being able to understand the parts of ourselves that need healing in ways that we can grow and develop. And it really is our opportunity to understand the parts of ourselves that need attending to, especially with regard to faith and growth and positivity. And when preparing for today, when thinking and asking Spirit, how can we best understand ego as well? What Spirit kind of shared is that it gives us the opportunity to understand how to become the healthiest, most complete versions of ourselves. And our ego actually holds on to the aspects of ourselves that have been hurt. So when we have experienced any sort of pain or mistreatment, or we have been victimized in some way, not victims, but when we have been victimized, sometimes that ego wants to hold on to the experience and the hurt and the pain that came with it. And when we revisit and these hurt, like those wounds over and over again, I think Christina in a previous service shared that it is important, in order to overcome something, we have to go through it. And the ego gives us and shares with us what we need to actually address and to go through what it means to heal those aspects of ourselves so that we can elevate to the highest levels that we possibly can. And our ego says, sometimes says like, I need closure, or I need X from someone in order for me to heal. And in fact, Ivy has offered a free mini class on forgiveness, where that's actually the farthest thing from the truth. We don't need someone to validate our forgiveness and to validate our ability to let go of things that have hurt us. The ego tells us that I need something outside of myself in order to heal, but in fact, we don't. And it allows for us to take the onus of responsibility for healing onto ourselves. And when doing so, Spirit said to go and read a couple of things as well about ego. And as Spirit said, when you read these things, it will make sense. And so what Spirit directly, sometimes, like, Spirit is very intentional about having us read specific things and going to specific sources. And one of the things that popped up was that ego is where the conscious and the subconscious mind meet. So this is where the things that we sometimes during the day think are healed and we think are not issues or problems, but then we dream. I know that Ivy has a free mini class on dreams. And that is where during our dream state is when the things that have been bothering us in our subconscious come to light. And that's when sometimes we deal with them in the dream state because we're not dealing with them in our conscious state. So when things that come up in whatever way that they do that are held in our subconscious are then brought into our conscious mind, they're brought into our conscious mind, that is when we have the opportunity to address what those issues are, ways that we can grow and prevent these things from holding us back. And by allowing for, I think of, Paul is our tarot expert, but I think sometimes I've been reading and studying a bit more on tarot, and it makes me think of the High Priestess, and where the High Priestess, there's that veil of pomegranate the veil of pomegranates, and behind the veil is the subconscious, and then what is in front of the veil, that is like the actual conscious mind. And so when thinking about the ego, it made me think of that particular card, because it's a card that I resonate with deeply. And so that is our opportunity to be able to address and see what is where our wounds are, the things that we may think we've healed but have not, the things that we're trying to avoid, and the things that we're trying to kill in ourselves, when in actuality, when we allow them to bubble up and we allow ourselves to grow and heal from them, that is when our spiritual elevation can really take on new light. I'd like to open it up to Reverend Christina and Reverend Paul.
I'll go next. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so my definition of ego, I've studied this quite a bit. And in astrology, we consider the sun being the ego, because the sun is your identity. So some sun signs seem to have more ego than others. And Leo in particular, and I think everybody on this panel has significant Leo energy in their chart. But we do tend to have, a bigger, I guess, ego. And, ego is your identity. So think about your name. Think about your story, the stories that you identify with, your experiences, your accomplishments. These are all things that you relate to yourself. And the ego is at the mercy of what happens to it. Because, if somebody, the ego is fear-based. So if somebody attacks your ego, you're going to react, your reactivity is going to be very negative. So you use your reactivity to strengthen your ego, because it's fear-based. And the ego tells you that you're separate from other people. Well, I would never do that, or I wouldn't be with those people, or, I would never, I don't know, whatever it is. And it's, it makes you feel very separate. And your ego also has the need to make you feel important. So it's like your need to be different than everybody else and to be more important. And sorry, just reading my notes. Your mind, your ego and your mind come together, and you identify with your mind and your thoughts. And I think there's a mini class on that too. I can't remember the name of it. But so your mind, your ego and your mind are really like the same, because you think you are your mind. Okay. So it's very interesting. And you think about when you're a child and your ego is just forming, right? So your parent gives you a toy or something, and now all of a sudden this toy is like part of you, and you're identifying, maybe it's like a doll or something, and then your friend wants to borrow the doll, so they take the doll, and now you're like crying and you're screaming and you're kicking because they just took a part of you. That doll's part of you, and it happens when you get older too, because now instead of the doll, we have a car. We have a job, we have, this experience, that degree, whatever. So it's like the ego has to feel important. It has to identify with something. And the toys just get bigger when we get older. The ego can also spin tales that are mistaken for reality. If, you can talk yourself into controlling your environment. Your ego, so that makes you feel important. Your ego derives a sense of self through your thoughts, so identifying with your thoughts. And the mind tends to loop, and it can loop very negatively. So ego, because you're identified with those thoughts, it just becomes part of what you think is you. And we'll talk about that. I know Ivy wants to talk about that another time. And also too, like, ego can make you seem like a victim too. You can be like, oh, I tried everything I could and they were just so horrible to me. So it can also make you a victim. That is still ego. And ego is really trying to make yourself superior to someone else. And I always think of like ego as sort of like empty too, because I don't know if anybody's read that book. Anybody with kids probably has read the book, To Fill a Bucket. And it's a really cute book. I read it over and over with my kids. But they say in there, like, you're trying to fill a bucket by giving people compliments, or you're trying to give them like positive things, but you can't take from an empty bucket. Like, your bucket has to be filled. So it's like the ego is empty, trying to become full instead of being full first, so it's almost like trying to take things. The ego is the root of all suffering. It's very much based on the stories that you tell yourself. The ego really is never satisfied for long either. So if, let's say that the ego is the part of you that says, I will be happy once I have $100,000. And then or let's use the lottery. Okay. So the ego says, I'll be happy when I win the lottery. Okay. And you win the lottery. Okay. So now you have all this money and you're really happy. But then after a little while, maybe a year or so, you're not happy anymore. Or you get that, you were going after a car and you got the car. And now it's not enough, because the ego is only satisfied for a little while. And then it wants more and more and more. So it only lasts for a little bit. And the ego can also make you, it's the part of you that always wants to be right too, and make everybody else wrong. So it's like, it makes you very separate. It's like, well, I'm right, I know this, and it really does sort of put you in a box. And it really doesn't let much in. And we are actually taught early on that this is normal, that these are all normal ways of behaving. So that's my definition of ego, and deriving your sense of self through your thoughts and through your story. Because, if I was abused, then I say, oh, well, I'm abused. I was abused, right? That's still ego, because you're attaching that story to your identity. You have any thoughts, Paul?
I do. I like that the high priestess was brought up, because I see that, with the black column, the white column, there's like this duality to it. And, I was thinking, I had posted today, it was, I don't know if you guys had seen it. It was like a Venn diagram of, spirit and ego, and, where they overlap is growth. But that made me think it showed all the things that they were pointing out as ego, like fear and, I forget there was jealousy, insecurity, repression, deceit, resent, and division. And, the fear made me think quite a bit that, what we have, like ego is you in your entirety, right? In every aspect of you, it has two pieces, so it's like ego has good side, like the opposite of fear, like courage. Okay. So you can be courageous and, have every aspect of each thing at the same time, like nothing is ever, without its other half. Everything has its mirror image, has its opposite. I like to think too, like even with tarot cards, if you get something in the upright, it also contains the reverse, and it's like you don't want it to go that way, but you have to consider that as part of your reading as well. You have to say, this does contain this, so this is also a possibility. It's not just going to be all sunshine. You could blow it, like just don't rest on your laurels. So like the ego, people say they got rid of their ego, there's ego death and all these things. It's like, well, you didn't. You just got rid of the bad parts, maybe, like you cannot be without. And that, you know, thinking about that is that it's, which I think we'll go into next week, is how to, you know, how to conquer it and how to work with it. But, you know, like we talk a lot about vibrations here, and there's highs and lows, especially I know with Christina, with the planets and everything, high vibe, low vibe, and Danny, certain numbers, the energy carried with them, you know, how do you use it? And that's pretty much it. It's like your ego is you, you know, even it's in the word, that's what it means, right? Like I am, I think, in Latin. But the point is, you have it all at the same time, you know, and to just accept that, you know, that you can't just get through it without having the bad, you know, and even if it's all good and you've done it, it's still ongoing, you know, because hey, you're courageous, but there is still fear in there. Like it's never 100% together, you know. It could be 99 point whatever, but there's still that little bit, you know, so that you have to just constantly do it. Unfortunately, sometimes it's easier, but you know, to keep going, you just have to understand that it's yourself, that these are all aspects of yourself, and work with them, you know. I don't know if I went outside the scope, but I do feel that, you know, there is so much to be said about halves and the way things go, the top side, the bottom side, you know, and how they outweigh each other at certain times, and just knowing that there's balance and you need the balance. But to say that, you know, if you have a bad aspect, that you know, there isn't a good side, or if you have this good side, there isn't a bad side, and you could swap at any time. So the ego is very fluid, I feel, and it's, you know, just keeping that contained, you know, how to channel that fluid to where you want it to go, you know. And I feel that that's the big problem, is keeping it where you want it, you know. And holes will develop, and how quickly can you plug them up and get back on course, you know. But
yeah, I agree that that's a good point. That ego, you know, it's when it becomes unbalanced that it really becomes a problem. And, you know, we see that a lot in our society, because, you know, the West is very, you know, ego-based society. And, you know, when we have those high vibrational and low vibrations, well, we do tend to see, unfortunately, on social media and on television, things like that, we do tend to see the lower vibration of ego. And we also see it in our political leaders too. So people, you know, kids especially, I think, don't have really good role models when it comes to integrating ego. You know, we don't have I mean, not that we don't have any, but we don't have a ton of humble people as you know, as icons, or, you know, role models for you know, for the youth. So they are far and few between. So yeah, it's like, it's definitely, you know, like, and just because we're Leos doesn't mean that we're egomaniacs. But it, you know, it does give us sort of maybe like a false illusion sometimes, you know, like maybe we just get a little too stuck in our ego sometimes, and we have to bring it back down. You know, Aries too. Aries is very, because, you know, the sun is exalted in Aries, and, you know, you can get kind of carried away with the ego thing. You know, it's easy to do. And because so many people around us do it, it just seems like it's normal, and it's not. Thoughts, Danny?
So I so appreciate both you and Paul speaking about like the high vibration and low vibration, or the different polarities of like the astrology, and even like within the tarot cards, because I'm thinking about numerology. Some of the thing with ego is kind of like, especially when we commit to, or we begin our spiritual journey, and we commit to starting that process of growth. And starting that process of growth sometimes is recognizing and seeing what is actually there. And unfortunately, the thing is, sometimes it's just, especially for anyone who may have, and, you know, I myself included, where, you know, we block out who we are for so long, different aspects of who we are. But then once we are willing to see what is actually there, there sometimes might be an element of not liking what we actually see. So wanting to escape what is actually there. And it really does resonate and connect with the numbers, because with the numerology, like with our life path number, that is directly related to the day, month, and year of our birth. And the numerology, our life path number, is the number that we're having for life. That is the energetic vibration, the numeric energetic vibration we're going to have for the rest of our lives. And so what's there is there. And the same applies for like the expression numbers and the heart's desire number, the heart's desire number being the core of who we are. And especially because when we start this journey and who we think we want to be, not who we think we want to be, who we want to be, who we aspire to be, and what's actually there, there might be a disconnect. But the thing is, the disconnect is not, to solve that disconnect is not to kill the ego or to attempt to kill the ego. It's just going to put us back so many more steps. And there are high and low vibrations with the numbers as well. And they can help us to understand the why we react in certain ways. And it can empower us, like when ready to go through what is there. And we're going to speak more about that next week, but it really can definitely be empowering. And Paul, when you spoke about the fluidity of this healing process, it brought me right back to, I think the high priestess must be with us tonight, because it made me think of the water. Like, I think like the high priestess, like I think one of her feet, I think a foot is in water, if I'm not mistaken, or possibly both of them. And I was like reading where the water from the high priestess extends and flows into every other card where there is water. And so that fluidity is something that is something that especially if the water representing the subconscious mind, it shows up everywhere and we can't escape it. And I love when you describe like the reverse cards, because it shows us where the potential might be. And I loved how you described, where the opportunities for healing and growth can be. And that was, so I really appreciate you lifting that up.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, it's something that I still struggle with, is I like to think things are, black and white, but like I was saying, where if nothing can be 100% with 0% attached, so that means that everything is gray, nothing is at the other end. And I think it's neat that the high priestess is between a white column and a black column, just kind of saying that everything is gray, that it is fluid, that everything can be anything, kind of like anything at once, and it's funny that every Sunday service ends up, I start talking about science or something, but it's like a quantum state, right? It's everywhere until you measure it, so it's just everything at once, and I think it's just embracing that and understanding that, you just have to, I guess measure it, to find it out.
So I appreciate you bringing up like the science behind it as well, because it is when we talk about like the universe and how the universe just responds, it doesn't have judgment. It doesn't judge what we do. It just responds to what we do. And it's just like, I believe it may have been a couple of sermons ago where Ivy mentioned the universe doesn't, and spirit doesn't say, oh, well, that is a great choice. Like, that's great. It's like, no, well, that's your choice. Okay, well, here's more of it. And then in the same respect, regardless of I'm not saying regardless of the choice, but it's like, if it's something that we think is a good thing, they'll give us more of it. And so I really appreciate you lifting that up. So, and also, Christina, when you mentioned about like politicians and leaders, one of the things that has been spoken about and mentioned, especially, well, I think throughout like any movement, but especially most recently, especially movement work and social justice work, is the need to pass the work on to other people. And when you described how it's just, when for leaders who might become individualistic in their thinking, when in fact that for any kind of like social change to happen, it's like literally, it's like a relay race and you have to pass it along. Like there's nothing in this world that can be accomplished, especially long-term change. It can't happen in one generation or even with one person. And God willing, we'll have some of the folks who may have worked on some things will have the chance to see some of the fruits of that labor. But in terms of the ego means, especially in this type of work, it is recognizing I have contributed, I have played the role that I'm supposed to play, and then it's time for someone else, another leader, another organizer, another activist to pick it up and for them to be able to grow in the work themselves. And I've heard some folks say that one of the stifling things in movement work is when folks don't want to pass it on, when they want to be that leader in that work for the longest, and that just can't be the case. And I think with any movement, like we see, we're witnessing with Ivy, how she is training and lifting up new light workers and creating space and creating opportunities for folks to be able to grow in their life's purpose. And we see that in social justice movement work too, where we see organizers and activists being trained and lifted up so that they can continue the work themselves. And that is where recognizing, even when, this work might mean a lot to me, I know that it's not all for me. And knowing when it's time to pass it on is a part of that growth and being able to see the ego and embrace it for what it is.
Right. And the ego tends to be like king energy. Like I think of like a king. So, like I worked with someone who, I'm sure it wasn't his quote, but a social studies teacher who quoted it all the time. And he said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it's like, as soon as like a politician or somebody gets a certain amount of power, it's almost like the ego just wants more and more. It's kind of what we were saying, that, what you get, it's never good enough. It's good for a while, but then you want more and more and more. So, and we'll talk about how to sort of get out of that next week. But if you're just talking ego, that's why they call people egomaniacs and things like that. But because it's the low vibration, it's the, I'm more important. I have power and I want more power. And it's just the nature of the ego, unfortunately. But I could see how, somebody would do something and they were revered and they would want more of that, you know what I mean? Instead of passing the torch, so to speak. So that's why we're talking about it, because it's such a hard line to navigate. But I think that we can all think of people in our lives who have, a relatively big ego, maybe even ourselves, and need to tone it down or need to get some clarity. Because if you're all about you, or you think everybody's talking about you, or like, you think, if everything centers around you, then you need to get some clarity. You need to get an objective point of view there and, go to the higher vibration. And, because ego, I think somebody calls it, I don't remember who, I like to cite people, but I can't remember who said this, but I think they call it like edging God out ego. So, because really, like, you're not thinking about spirit or God, you're thinking about yourself. So, if you think of ego in that way too. So, really like low vibration ego, but, you can't live without an ego too. So that's what we're going to have to learn to navigate. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chats, or I don't know if any questions were on TikTok, but anybody, Paul?
Yeah. The metaphysical, she's got some questions about, handling ego, which we're going to get into next week. So, this is just the what is phase, but she did have a question. Ego has been bestowed on us, then what's its purpose?
Right. There is a purpose, believe it or not. And, I guess like it kind of comes down to what you were saying, Paul. It's not black and white, it's gray. And, we will definitely have some next week. I know we are going to be talking about how to navigate both, but, in reality, we have to align, and it's going to be all about alignment. So, you know, but when we're talking about the negative part of ego, which is, you know, because if the ego is what causes suffering, and some people have more of an ego, so if they have more of an ego, they might suffer more. You think about like I don't know, somebody like a CEO of a company. Okay, so he's a very important person. You know, he has his people working for him. He's got his car driver or whatever. But, you know, he gets fired tomorrow. So who is he without all that stuff? Is he still the same person? You know, or was he identifying with all the things he had around him? So these are all things that, you know, that can get out of balance. So it is going to be key to align and balance.
And it also feels like the purpose of ego as well is, it feels like to, in order to become the best versions of ourselves, we have to address the aspects of ourselves that need addressing and need healing. And if we didn't have the ego, especially when, you know, those parts of ourselves that we might see as undesirable or things that we might want to heal or change within ourselves, without the ego, we might not even recognize them. Like if we only had access to the good parts of ourselves, how do we know what needs healing? And how do we know what to address? Oh my, hello. Hi, Jesus. Jesus is our, hello, thank you for contributing. And we have the opportunity to address the things and address those aspects of ourselves that without the ego we might not recognize. And even when thinking about like this concept of shame that comes with ego, and when recognizing the parts of ourselves that are not the aspects of ourselves that we might want to carry for the rest of our lives, that shame just might lead us to shut down. But the thing is, in order to level up, we've got to address those things. And the ego can be so very useful in helping us identify what they are.
And it's part of the human experience too, because the other side doesn't have the ego. Like this is just a human experience. So, you know, we are definitely meant to manage it. It's just, it gets so out of control. And I'm sure that we will talk more about integration next week. But yeah, you can't, you know, like there's a spiritual side of life, but there's also a very human, physical, you know, have to do the work side of being human. And we are here to learn about that. So you're right, you know, like it's something that we wouldn't be able to learn probably without it.
Absolutely. And Kristen, I appreciate earlier when you mentioned how when a few times, like when someone might have something or might identify in a certain way, and that, or like the example that you gave, if someone was granted or gifted $100,000 tomorrow, and then, you know, sometime later, they're no longer happy or satisfied. And that really kind of relates, it feels like, to joy, because joy is that sense of fulfillment and being content from the inside out, without outside factors, without any, like, not necessarily affirmations, but anything that's from outside of ourselves, so that when, God forbid, if anything were to be taken from us, we still have that internal joy, and we have that ability to feel gratitude and to have a sense of peace no matter what's happening. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, and if somebody's living strictly from ego, they're gonna really react anytime something happens. You know what I mean? They're going to go from reaction and, you know, not from any other place, because in their mind, if they're just operating from ego, they're going to be empty when somebody takes something from you. So it's very interesting. But unfortunately, you know, society, like at least Western society, has really kind of normalized it. And, you know, we don't fill people's buckets, you know, and we don't start with a full bucket either. So I don't know if anybody's ever read that book, but it was a good book.
I like to read it. I'm going to get the title from you after our sermon today, just because I'd love to see that. Just as a reminder for anyone who has any prayer requests, to please type them in to whether you're on TikTok or whether you're on YouTube. Please share them so that we can lift them up when that time comes. We are. This is something, especially with ego, is something that we have had the chance to think about for a while, but it's something that is so present within all of us, and it's something that we literally cannot escape. So there is no point in demonizing ourselves. I think Ivy used that term when sharing her thoughts and her perspectives on ego. There's no point in demonizing our ego or demonizing ourselves, because unfortunately, with Ivy has a class called Fighting the Dark. When we demonize ourselves, it opens, unfortunately, it creates a pot of negative thinking and negative energy that unfortunately could potentially attract more of that negativity. And that's something that we don't deserve. We don't deserve to have to do that to ourselves. Does anyone have any additional thoughts or any? Yes.
I just saw that Elsie was saying that it's healthy to practice constantly questioning your ego. Yes, it is a healthy practice to constantly question your ego. Or is that lack of confidence? We will get into that next week, but yes, you'll find that you do have to constantly sort of stay on top of yourself about it, for sure. I know that we do that all the time. And then I know Jill Marie said, Danny, that's an amazing point. I never thought of ego in that way.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, we are a community together and we learn from one another. And Jill, grateful that you are here. And I know that we all have the chance to learn from you as well. So we thank you for that.
And we had one on TikTok from Lavender Time who was asking, how do we decipher between ego and intuition?
You want to take this one, Danny?
I'll start off and then we can, so the difference between ego and intuition. So intuition, from everything that I've kind of experienced and have read, and from what Ivy has shared, Ivy has a mini class called the Still Small Voice, and really is about intuition and God's voice. One of the ways that we can differentiate between intuition and ego is intuition is emotionless. Intuition is very monotonous. It's almost kind of like asking a question and waiting for the answer. Then all of a sudden you have an answer, and it's like it's a very, thank you, intuition, but it's very dry. There's not a lot of emotion. When we feel emotion, or we feel a sense of like a strong sense of feelings, that's not intuition. That is potentially ego. That is our feelings. Those are old wounds that are popping up, none of which are bad, just a part of, as we were saying, part of the human experience. Sorry. Part of the human experience. And we have the opportunity to make sure that when we are having this human experience, that when those feelings pop up and when those, whether it be untreated wounds or just, or with ego popping up, that we don't confuse it with intuition, because sometimes when those feelings pop up and we might be tempted to react or to respond or think that it's God's voice or that it is our guides or something telling us to move or act, when in fact it's not. So that's kind of like one of the ways that we can differentiate between ego and intuition. We can guarantee that intuition is emotionless. There are no feelings associated with it.
Yeah, and I would say ego is the mind. It's your thoughts, where intuition it comes from outside of you. You know, it comes from your higher self or from God, and it's peaceful, where your mind is just kind of looping thoughts. It's just one thought, then the next thought, then the next thought, and usually negative thoughts. So that's the way that I would differentiate the two. And when it all comes back around to you, or to what you want, or it's all about you, that's when you know it's ego and not intuition.
Yeah, like dealing with the both together, like the human side, the spirit side, ego, intuitions. I don't know. This popped into my head, and like I can't shake the image, but it's like driving two boats at the same time, and like you go between the two boats. One steers itself pretty much, and the other you have to go in and like correct to keep up with this spirit boat, And it's like when you realize that you're steering, that's when you're in your ego. You have to like kind of take it back and just let if it's making the decision for you, like pretty much I'm in total agreement that it's like, okay, good, that's intuition. But when you realize that you're turning, that you're actively doing something, that's the ego. I don't know, I don't even really like boats, but that's what came into my head.
And that's actually such a great analogy as well, because we'll wait until next week to talk about this, but it's just such great symbology. We'll just say that. It's incredible symbology. And as a way to kind of recognize the role that we play, and when we should, kind of like with the analogy of the boat, put our foot on the accelerator and move forward, versus when we should just take our foot off and know that we don't need to be in control, and it's a big part of that process. Do we have any final thoughts on ego that we'd like to share before we might open our service up to prayers?
I'm set on my end.
Okay. Well, just to kind of round out the things that we've had the chance to, that Reverend Christina, Reverend Paul, and I have had the chance to share tonight, it's just a reminder that the things that we see in ourselves that we might not, that we want to heal and that we might not see as desirable are the things that actually make us human. And some of the things that we might not necessarily appreciate the most about ourselves are the parts of ourselves that may have actually gotten us to the point that we are where we are today. We may have actually survived a lot of what we've gone through as a result of the parts of our ego that we are sometimes shame ourselves for having. And so once we're past those, those parts of our lives where we may have been in survival mode, we have the right and the opportunity to be able to address them, thank them for what they gave us, and then heal from them. And we'll have the chance to do that, to talk about that process next week as well. But at the end of the day, please, if we just encourage all of us who are with us tonight to never demonize ourselves, because we are all children of the universe and we deserve that, especially when we are willing to put the work in. So, Paul, may I turn the virtual, as you described it, wheel over to you for our prayer requests?
Yes, thank you. You did get a compliment on TikTok that your voice is so calming.
Well, thank you. I so appreciate that. And we so appreciate who is on TikTok with us. And we feel your spirit and your presence. So thank you.
Okay, so let me go through a couple prayers here. Before I get into that, keep posting them. I'll get to them. And if anyone would like to donate to the church, feel free. There is a button on YouTube if you're on Ivy's site, or through ivyreverepsychicmedium.com. Everything is appreciated. Okay, so let me get into these prayers here. We have one from Metaphysical. Looking for prayers. She has a histamine intolerance and foot pain due to a break. So let's lift up healing prayers for Metaphysical, that she gets through this pain quickly, easily. Let's claim that. And we have one from Maribel Mariposa, who is fighting dark energy. So let's lift this up, get her protection and the strength she needs to make the right choices and fight the darkness. Claim that for her. Over here, one for Alex. Like prayer for herself and anyone who's going through a transition in life to stay strong, have faith. The universe has our backs. Here. Put that up. Give everyone the strength that needs it. Tap into that universal energy. Get through your transition. Claim that for Alex and anyone looking. So Crystal. The prayer for RS, who's battling addiction and needs to find strength to fight. Flip this up for RS. Find the strength they need. Fight this. Rid themselves of that addiction. Continue on. Happy and healthy. Claim that for RS. Okay. That's all I have here. Danny, Christina?
I'd like to lift up anyone who is on their spiritual path right now, who might be arriving at that point where it is just difficult. They might feel like they're being tested. They might feel like they are under attack. We just pray that they continue on this journey and do not give up on themselves. And remember that there is a deep purpose for them on the path that they're on. So we pray that they continue on and don't give up on themselves. And please don't ever for a second think that you are not protected and held.
And I just want to say, a prayer for inmates, people who are in jail, that they find inner peace and inner freedom in their soul.
We thank Reverend Christina, Reverend Paul. As always, it is an honor and a privilege and a joy to be here with all of you. Ivy is here with us in spirit, and we thank everyone who joined us this evening, and for everyone who will have the chance to download and listen to our sermon as well. We send our love and our energy to all of you as well. So
thank you.
Yes, thank
Thanks,
you.
Danny.
Thank you, Danny, for leading. This was fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. It was just, it was spirit and it was all of us together. So grateful for the chance to be here with all of you as always.